It's been a week since the Assad regime's fall, and the desperate search for those subjected to its horrors continues. Families searching for answers are slowly starting to discover the grim realities of where missing loved ones may be. So what has the fall of Assad unearthed, and what does it mean for the future? I'm Charlene White, and this is What You Need to Know. Hello and welcome to What You Need to Know. I'm joined now by our correspondent John Ray, who joins us from Damascus, the capital of Syria, where he's been reporting for us since the fall of President Assad just over a week ago. Now, how would you describe any changes on the streets there, John, in terms of, the atmosphere and as to whether anything has changed?
Well, let me start with an explanation, Charlie. It may look like I am broadcasting from a room within one of President Bashar al-Assad's former palaces. In fact, it's just the only hotel room we could find big enough to accommodate our kit, so we could talk to you today. In terms of mood, I would say really it has changed from that moment of Assad's departure, utter disbelief that a 50-year nightmare under the dictatorship of Assad and Assad's father, that was gone sort of overnight. By Friday, there were scenes of utter jubilation and euphoria in the streets of the capital as many tens of thousands of people came out for Friday prayers and then celebrations in the main central square of the capital. I don't think I've ever been in a crowd of people so ecstatically happy with the unexpected turn of events. Since then, I think things have settled down a little bit. The shops are open, the markets are open, traffic is back to its busiest, worst in the city. There's a bit more realism about what is happening and the challenges that lie ahead now for Syria.
Well, in terms of life getting back to normal, that may well be the case, but with Assad gone, the realities of the horrors of his rule are coming to light. I mean, what are we discovering since his fall? Well,
what we're beginning to discover is the true extent of the brutality of his regime, according to the United Nations. Since the beginning of the civil war here in 2011, Bashar al-Assad had murdered something like 300,000 of his own citizens, and another 100,000 were forcibly disappeared, which is a euphemism in most cases also for being butchered by his feared, notorious security forces. We sort of knew that was going on while Bashar al-Assad was in prison. Reports came out, but we're now beginning to see with our own eyes what this horror actually meant for the Syrian people. And there have been some of the most distressing scenes that I have seen here of the families who have spent much of the past week going from hospital morgue to hospital morgue, looking for any signs of relatives who just went missing. We spent a part of the weekend with a lovely woman whose name was Raud Abdal Razak, and she was desperately searching for her brother Rihad. He had disappeared in the middle of the night about 8 years ago. He left behind then a baby son. They knew he was alive as of 5 months ago. He was in one of Assad's prisons. They'd been to every hospital in this city, every mortuary in this city, and there was simply no trace. The conclusion that they are forced to come to is that he's one of the many tens of thousands of Syrians who have been murdered by their own government.
And a lot of them are in these mass graves, some of which you've been visiting. And can you talk through the scale of what you saw? And do we have any idea of how many of these mass graves exist?
Well, there are a lot of them because they need a lot to accommodate all those bodies. But we took about a half-an-hour drive northeast out of Damascus, and we visited a site near a town called Adra. And it's a very peculiar site which greets you. There is a high security wall and there's a guard tower, and when you drive through, at first sight, it appears to be guarding nothing other than a bare patch of land. But while we were there, local people had begun to dig, and what they were uncovering was gruesome indeed. While we were there, they took from the earth 7 bags containing human remains, skeletons. We know that they were prisoners because on each bag was written the prison number and also the name of the prisoner and the year in which they died, which was around 10 years ago. If we investigated further, you looked at satellite images of that site going back 10 years, and it is nothing. It's just a piece of scrubland. And then quite early on in the Civil War, workmen move on site. You can see the construction of roads. You can see the construction of long ditches. There are service buildings that are put up, and then you see lorries begin to appear on site. Now that is backed up by eyewitness testimony from local people we spoke to. One man in particular told us that during this period there was an army checkpoint close by, that from time to time the army would stop people driving. They would then force them to go out and work on the construction of this site to dig ditches. He claims at the time he had no idea what the purpose was, but he also told us that quite regularly they would see heavy lorries, covered lorries moving onto the site. He said there was a very bad smell coming from these lorries, the smell of death. But this site is across the road from what was also quite a sizable military base. And Charlene, obviously, if you were a local person, you were really not encouraged to ask questions about what was going on there. We passed our information over to Amnesty International. They've sent a team to investigate it. They say their suspicions mirror ours, that indeed this is one of several sites of mass graves which are now beginning to be discovered around Damascus.
So, considering what you've seen and the information that you've passed on, what do you think the prospect is of these crimes, these alleged crimes that have been done in Assad's name? What are the chances of these crimes being properly investigated?
Well, first of all, you have to think about the scale of what's gone on here, and human rights activists talk about this being war crimes on a size that we haven't seen since the Second World War. People are talking about the potential for a second Nuremberg process. But there's some real problems here, because the site we visited, which we didn't disturb, there's no guard on there now. Anybody can wander on and begin to look themselves at what's under the soil. There's a second problem, is although the Syrian machinery of death was on an industrial scale, it was also extremely bureaucratic. They recorded the names of every prisoner from the moment of their arrest to the moment of their execution. So there are records. However, they're held many times in government buildings which have been ransacked in the course of liberation. We were at the headquarters today of one such building, the headquarters of the intelligence services that looked after the countryside areas around Damascus. And the place really is in ruins. There are records strewn around the place. There is water underfoot. It really is a wreck. And then the third problem is this, that it could be some time, perhaps many weeks, before UN war crimes investigators get into country to start to try to make sense of this absolute mass of evidence. The next problem, of course, is the man who's at the centre of this, Bashar al-Assad, isn't even in the country at the moment. He's in Moscow. So there's a question about how he might be ever face trial.
Let's look to the future now. John, you've spent time in Syria, spent time in Damascus, been talking with Syrian people. What's the sense at the moment in terms of what it is that they want now and how hopeful they are for the future?
Well, first of all, they want Bashar al-Assad and his senior henchmen to face trial. That's not quite as far-fetched an idea as you might think, because Russia, which is now home to Bashar al-Assad, will at some stage want to make a deal with the new authorities here. Perhaps they will want to keep their military bases, very precious to the Russians, and in exchange, well, President Putin has one card he can hand over, which of course is Assad. Beyond that, there's a great deal of concern, I think you'll have to say, about what the new arrangements might mean. You know, Bashar Assad fell with astonishing speed. The people who did most to oust him are Islamists. You know, these are the kind of people who were once affiliated with Al-Qaeda, although they've distanced themselves considerably from those roots. They're not the kind of people that you would normally associate with a pluralistic society. Remember, is a kaleidoscope, a mosaic of people who make up this country. There's a Sunni majority, there are Christians here, and there are Alawites. Now, many of the Alawites, those are the people who were the supporters of Assad. A lot of those people have fled the country, and I think it will take a great deal to entice them back here. Having said that, the early signs from Ahmad al-Shara, who is the leader of HTS, the Islamists now who run this country, they've been good. He's been very moderate. He's talked about stability. He's talked about a peaceful transition of power. But, you know, we really are still at very, very early stages of momentous change in this country. Half a century of brutal dictatorship. They've never really had anything that passes as a democracy here before. So, you know, everybody's holding their breath. They're crossing their fingers. They're hoping for the best. But in their hearts, quite a lot of them, I think, also quite concerned about what the future might hold.
Yeah, there's so much unknown about the future. But John, finally then, you were one of the first TV journalists in Syria during the Arab Spring. So I just sort of want to take a moment just for your own personal reflections, really, on what's happened in the past few weeks.
You're right. I mean, more than a decade ago now, myself and a colleague, we simply walked into Syria from the Turkish border, not having any idea of what horrors lay ahead for this country. But my main memory really has been of a young French photojournalist called Remy Oclick, who I worked with near Homs 10 years ago. A few days after we worked together, he was killed in Homs by an Assad rocket. Just one death, of course, amongst so many thousands. And I think just one small indicator how the war here, the bloodletting here, has touched so many lives in Syria and beyond.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Well, if you want to watch John's full report, head over to the news round over on ITVX. And don't forget to subscribe to What You Need to Know and check out our back catalogue for other quick briefings on a range of headline topics. But until next time, thank you for listening.